In stories, from video games to movies, we always hear about the good guy rising up against the corrupt evil bad guy who's in power, but the truth is it's never really that simple, as those in power often hide their evil deeds with conspiracies and hiding the evidence behind closed doors, and there are many video games who actually tackle this, where the player actually has to try and figure out the mystery first before tackling the bad guy. But what about games where you are the one in power with the ability to cover up or expose the conspiracy and to manipulate the public? Well, those are the games we're going to be talking about today, but before we can get to them, let's first look at a game where you, well, like I said before, are powerless and have to rise up against the corruption. And a good example of this is INFRA. INFRA is a game all about exploring abandoned buildings and looking for damages, which is an oddly specific topic for a game, but somehow it manages to pull it off, and as the game goes on you slowly uncover on why these buildings were abandoned, which is all part of one big conspiracy. Throughout the abandoned buildings you'll find a whole host of documents, voice recordings and notes which tell of a story which in short is about how those corrupt with power bankrupted all that there was below them for whatever reason, throwing the city's economy into a state of decay. But then there's a twist later on in the game that reveals that those we thought were the big bad people in power were actually only pawns to an even bigger scheme, and whilst it's a pretty simple twist, we've gone this entire time making up this narrative in our head with the little evidence we find that these are the bad guys. To have it all shattered really changes your perspective on what we've seen so far in the game, which is what makes it so effective, and it's something we'll see a lot more in the games we're going to be talking about. In the last video I talked about games where you're not the main character and you just play one small piece in the wider story, as you have to figure out what is going on in the wider story with the very little evidence you have, and this game is no different, as in INFRA you just play as a simple inspector and manager. You aren't really part of this big conspiracy, you're just an onlooker looking at it from the very bottom trying to figure out what's going on. The game basically forces you to become a detective and to make theories about what the story is, which makes every plot twist that shatters your perception on the game so far even more impactful, as that story that the game has presented so far isn't just told to you, you've had to figure it out, you've put effort into figuring it out, so the twist that shatters it really hits you way more. And that's what being at the bottom of the barrel of the story looks like, as you have to scrounge up evidence that those trying to cover up the story forgot about. So what about the games where you are the one trying to cover things up and you are the one in power, the complete opposite of what's going on in INFRA? Well, one of these games is Hypnospace Outlaw. Hypnospace Outlaw is a game in which you play as a moderator for what is essentially the 90s internet, as you go from site to site reporting and banning as whatever you see as against the rules. Oh yeah, and in the story of Hypnospace, the internet is called, well, the Hypnospace, and is only accessible within your dreams. Yeah, don't question it. As you explore the Hypnospace, the game feels very down to earth, as each Hypnospace user's profile gives you a little insight into their lives and how they choose to present themselves, and the worst you really have to deal with at this point in the game is just some copyrighted material and some bullying. Now compared to INFRA, which is a huge, painful, slow burner where you're simply a weakling compared to the higher powers, in Hypnospace Outlaw you have all this power and it can be really easy to get corrupt with it. As soon as you see someone violating the rules, it can be really easy to immediately report and ban them for that sweet dopamine of getting the job done. However, if you look a little bit more into each of the users' profiles, you can see why they're committing the crimes they do, which is something I definitely didn't do. As upon seeing these drawings of a detective fish, I immediately reported them, as this detective fish is a copyrighted character that they didn't have the license to, and thus it was breaking the rules. But anyone who actually bothered to investigate the user's profile would know that these drawings are actually really important to them and are of their kids in their school. Either way you have to report them. You may have all this power to ban people, but at the end of the day you still have to do your job and be a part of the cycle of moderation. This whole moderator job requires you to not have much insight. As you see a rule breaker, you report them, that's that. You don't need to investigate any more on why they're breaking the rules or any morals about it, you just report them, that's it, like a machine. But it's up to the player to choose if they want to investigate a crime or a user and see why they do what they do and uncover their secret story. Like the Chowder Man, for example. On the surface level, the Chowder Man is a joke character. He's a washed up musician who parades around his somewhat decent music, but he's pretty much irrelevant now, and the only fame he gets are from people laughing at him, and it's a running joke throughout the game that Chowder Man's songs will just appear on random websites. And to go the extra mile, a lot of Chowder Man's songs have fully animated music videos, which feels like a lot of effort for what's simply a joke character, which really makes him feel realistic, which makes what happens next way more impactful. As later in the game you can investigate Chowder Man a little bit, where you learn that in an accident he broke his leg and killed his friend with a helicopter, which completely broke him, and in a last ditch effort to say sorry for what he did, he made a secret song. However, this song was never released to the public and lays dormant on the dark web, only for the player with their moderation tools to find. The whole Chowder Man story is pretty sweet and sad at the same time, but most players won't even find it, as it all depends on how much effort you put into investigating him. That determines how much information you learn about his story. Heck, everything I've just said probably isn't the full picture, because there could be way more that I don't know about simply because I didn't investigate enough. Now, we've seen what a corrupt society looks like when you're a good guy having to rise up against the cycle of evil and a bad guy who has to be a part of the cycle of evil. But a lot of stories have a middleman, a morally grey guy who has the freedom to be a part of the cycle or not to. Someone in the middle who doesn't have the power to do what they want, but doesn't have the lack of power to be crushed by those same people. Just someone in the middle. And that's where we enter our final game, Not for Broadcast. Not for Broadcast is at first a comedy game in which you play as a broadcast engineer for a news channel. So basically it's your job to choose what camera angles get broadcasted to live TV and what gets censored out of the broadcast, like swear words. Now, even though it's the key part of the game, I doubt anyone's buying this game for its story, but either out of curiosity to see how the game's going to work, or to live out that power fantasy of controlling a TV station. It's the kind of game that Let's Players would play once, but then quit after one episode, but players who stick around will get that one-time experience. Now, Not for Broadcast is very much a mashup of different themes from the previous games. When it comes to themes from Hypnospace, Not for Broadcast has many running jokes and gag characters just like Hypnospace, who throughout the game, the more you investigate, you can slowly learn their layered backstory and that they're not completely jokes. And in terms of what the game takes from INFRA, it's got that same European political vibe to it as you uncover a larger conspiracy. And a good example of all of these themes put together is the story of Jeremy Donaldson. Jeremy Donaldson is the host for the news channel you're broadcasting in the game, and he's a pretty generic news host, but one of the first inside jokes the players are probably going to discover is that if you look behind the scenes and look at him on a camera when you're not supposed to, you can discover his more cynical side, how he's really fed up with his job, and how he hates how the news channel is slowly being transformed by the government into a propaganda piece. However, as the tone of the game gets more serious, so does Jeremy Donaldson, as he goes from being a joke character who's just fed up and angry about his job, to being a little insane and depressed, but he's still treated like a joke by the people around him, and maybe even the player. Obvious commentaries aside, it really does feel like he's a ticking time bomb, which finally goes off in the episode The Heat Wave, where he pulls a gun and threatens to kill people if his demands are not met. This scene is very different to different players depending on the player's actions and their attitude to the situation. To some, this might be a horror segment where tensions are high and you are not sure how to deal with Jeremy Donaldson, but with others, if they actually bother to investigate and sympathise with him, this could be really satisfying as he's finally getting free of the cycle. At this point in the game, you can be so immersed in the story that you can forget you're playing a video game and this is actually a movie. So when you realise you are playing a video game and you're not a bystander and you actually have to use your powers to control the situation is when the true emotion of this game hits you. Unlike INFRA, where you were investigating a grand conspiracy and a story that had already happened, now you're smack bang in the middle of that conspiracy, in the middle of that big story. And unlike hypnospace, where you are trapped in the cycle of corruption, now you have the option to exit and do your own path. But will you? Is it the best decision to do so? You better make your decision quick, because there's a man threatening everyone with a gun. To end out this video, I just want to say that you may have noticed that there's another theme that connects to these three games outside of just being about corrupt societies, and that's layers to their narrative. INFRA, you're investigating a conspiracy with multiple layers, going deeper and deeper to try and figure out the truth. In Hypnospace Outlaw, each user has their own character, which goes deeper and deeper the more the player chooses to investigate. And in Not For Broadcast, it's kind of a mix of both of them. And that's the key point of this video. Corruption in society begins not with evil people, but when those with power just disregard their responsibilities, not with any ill will intent, but simply because they're lazy and don't want to investigate into any layers of what they're doing, just making a bad situation for everyone below them. But when you choose to actually investigate the layers behind people and understand situations and then use your power correctly, then yeah, who would have thought, maybe things aren't so bad. So yeah, that's the end of this video. If you found it interesting, go play the games I'm talking about, or if you want more videos like it, just go onto my channel. Thank you very much and subscribe, and goodbye.